So, Chris, you chaired both the EMEA and the Americas Telco 2 executive brainstorms, particularly looking at mobile apps 2.0. What did we learn from those brainstorms?
Well, I think we learned. I personally learned quite a lot from them. I mean, I think what came across pretty clearly was we are, confirmed what a lot of people know, which is we're in a very thriving, relatively new app economy, and it's all very exciting. There's lots of apps coming up there. I think what was pretty clear was that so far telcos have been the beneficiaries of that. In many ways, apps and the app, they haven't contributed that much beyond flat rate data plans, which they're now receding from for very good reasons. But that did help
and
kick
they're
them.
beneficiaries in the sense that it helps people use their phone. It's more an interesting thing to do with their phone and create sales and usage.
I think it's sales and usage of mobile data plans principally. Right. But they haven't really contributed a huge amount in terms of other assets. And I think what was relatively clear is that it is unlikely that they are going to be large retailers of applications. We have two big boys out there in Google with Marketplace, obviously Apple with the App Store, and it's a thriving community. However, I think what was also very clear was concerns about that duopoly and the need, not just for developers who are finding it quite tough, the smaller developers, to make money from this, but also from the telcos to have a third or fourth player in there with a slightly different business model, not dominating the retail business model. And GetJar presented both in London and the US, very interesting presentation about more of a paid search model for applications that was very interesting. But there was also, I think, consensus that it was good to have the likes of Amazon getting involved and starting up a retail app store. The other thing I think was clear from the telco point of view was the future, if indeed there is a future for operators here, is more around serving and supporting those app stores and the developer community with relevant APIs and WAC.
So it's not about telcos having their own app stores, it's about making what they can provide into other people's applications better. That's what you're saying.
And I think that Peter Su, the CEO of WAC, really endorsed that view. I mean, there will be markets where operators still have a chance to be a retailer and to run the App Store, but I think they're going to be relatively few and far between. Certainly, I think it's unlikely in Western Europe. I mean, Facebook alone is really used on the mobile phone 20 plus times as much as any operator portal. So it is going to be very much supporting them, and WAC have obviously got an in-app billing API that they're pursuing as their single most important API. And the other thing that came across was the opportunity which Telefonica presented with Blueveer, their developer program, to actually use or make available voice and messaging as capabilities within the app layer and within applications. And they had an very interesting presentation about that, and the new business model that they had, which would effectively share some of the revenues that might be generated from applications that embed voice and messaging APIs, and share some of the revenue that they get from that with the developer, which gives them a new revenue stream. So that was very interesting.
So for telcos to be relevant in the app economy, as we were discussing, they need to add value to what's there rather than try to build their own kind of niche app stores in it. What are the key things that they need to do to achieve that?
Well, I think there are really three things that came across, that if this sort of APIs for the app economy are going to be the future or a key part of the value for them and in terms of delivering value. The first is they need a technical solution that is relatively consistent across operators. So for APIs to scale, there needs to be simple for developers to use them. And we've seen WAC, and we've seen GSMA 1 API, and I think the two are now coming together underneath the WAC umbrella. So you need to have a technical solution. The second, and this really has taken rather a long time coming, is a viable business model. And historically, I think operators have always looked to charge for pretty much everything, including for use of APIs. And the Blueveer model turns that on its head and says, well, actually, if you're helping us, Mr. Developer, Miss Developer, generate revenue, we're going to share some of that with you. So developers now, rather than seeing a potential liability whenever they use an API, certainly on the Blue Veer programme, are now going to see a potential revenue stream. So that's the second thing.
That seems entirely sensible, and we'd probably say we'd support that as a view.
Absolutely.
And the delegates seem to support that too, I think.
It was very clear the delegates support that. And in many ways it seems staggering it's taken that long. I mean, sort of Blue Veer is being put up as a sort of on a pedestal to some degree. It's not rocket science. And in fairness to the guys who presented it, Blue Veer, they didn't present it as rocket science. They said, we should have done this a while ago, I think, and they're very humble about it. I think the third thing that's going to make or break this is whether operators have valuable APIs. So in-app billing is very interesting, and particularly the recent news about Apple actually not blocking that. They kind of rescinded from that, and they had been blocking with e-readers and Sony and so on from allowing them to charge for things within the app. So that's a useful one. The other thing is clearly voice messaging can potentially be useful, but what is it above and beyond that? There are a lot of APIs available on the web. What can operators add that are valuable? And I think to some degree the jury's still out on that. What is their portfolio of APIs? You can't just stick an API out there and expect it to be used widely unless it is very valuable to the developers.
So what's next, Chris? I mean, how does it go from here? Can they do it? I mean, by which I mean, can telcos do it? Can they produce real relevance in the app economy, or are they just going to be bystanders?
Well, it was interesting what WAC and Blue Veer themselves said. They kind of said, this is a 50-50 chance. I think to some extent, whether they are relevant and whether they can do it depends on how you define success. And there's a difference between there's two sort of options, and maybe they need to do both. But the first is this really about looking at new revenues? Is it about advertising? Is it about payments and so on? Or is it about protecting your existing revenues and actually bringing telephony and integrating it into the web? And the Blue Veer programs more about that. I think historically it's all been about the former, about the new revenues, the new opportunities, participating in transactions. I think what we are seeing generally from operators is much more of an interest in protecting that voice and messaging revenue. And we've been talking to a lot of operators, and they're talking about what is our voice and messaging strategy, something they've never done before. In many ways, voice and messaging has been everybody's responsibility and nobody's responsibility. And I think we're going to see more of a shift back to that. And that'll probably be reflected in some of the API program. So can they do it? I mean, I probably would agree to some degree, to some extent with what Peter Su and Jose Valles of Blue Veer Telefonica said, which is, the jury's very much out. I don't know, frankly.
So in summary, what we'd say is pretty much they seem to be getting behind the right things. Are they doing it quickly enough is a question in point, and I think what we're saying is they need to do it more quickly. But it's still a sort of 50-50 chance to a degree on how successful it would be. Is there anything else you think they should be doing next?
Well, I think whether they are successful in any sort of digital play, particularly a two-sided one, this is not, but it requires scale. And the key question for the Telco API program in terms of adding value to the app economy is, can they scale it quickly? And operators have found that very difficult. They found it very difficult to do it with their own customer bases, let alone sort of across the wider telco community. So I think the things that they can do is they probably need in earnest to get behind stuff like WAC, or to work with the aggregators, which is another alternative. There are plenty out there who are doing a similar kind of role to WAC. WAC believes they can do a better role because of their scale and so on. But I think the other thing is it's not easy to engage with communities, with consumers and developers. In many ways, it strikes me that operators have very strong relationships with enterprises. And it may be this is about getting the right channel partners and right enterprise relationships to be able to scale fast. So it struck me that we had a very interesting presentation from Minitrade in Brazil, who had signed up a number of operators, all the operators, and had also signed up all the banks, and were therefore able to use create a platform for distributing voice and messaging products via the banks as a loyalty program. So instead of earning air miles through using your banking services, you actually could earn minutes and SMSs. And it struck me that that may be a way of scaling fast and getting some credibility and some scale, rather than trying to engage with the more disparate developers, which operators have found very, very tough.
Chris, thanks very much.
Thanks, Andrew.